to be here. I'm even more excited that all of you are here. This is our second wonderful conference. I'm going to introduce Alison Hazelbaker, who is an amazing, amazing speaker. Over 2 years ago, she contacted me about the prior conference that we did in 2012, and at the time I was thinking that, well, this is a meeting, a sort of a glorified meeting for my former students, and Alison said, I want to come and I want to speak at this thing, and you can't just limit it to the people that you've trained. You have to open this up to the whole world because it's really super important. And thank you for being here.
So, thank you for having me. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my opened mind, possessing and caressing me. Jai Guru Deva Ohm. No thing is going to change my world. Images of broken light which dance before me like a million eyes. They call me on and on across the universe. Thoughts meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox. They tumble blindly as they make their way across the universe. Jai Guru Deva Ohm. No thing is going to change my world. Sounds of laughter, shades of life are ringing through my open ears, inciting and inviting me. Limitless, undying love which shines around me like a million suns, it calls me on and on across the universe. Jai Guru Deva Ohm. No thing is going to change my world. Jai Guru Deva Ohm. I stand with my back against the counter, perplexed, curious, expectant. I am wrestling with my dissertation research ideas. What am I keen to explore, to know? A colleague steps into the kitchen alongside of me. What's up? You look perplexed. I am. I can't quite figure out what my research question should be. I've mulled it over, tossed it around in my head for weeks. I want to know how my client with the stroke was able to recover nearly completely in 6 weeks of craniosacral therapy sessions after 4 years of relatively ineffective PT when the new stroke client is making no progress. She shrugs, then comments, maybe his brain was affected worse than hers. No, that's not it. It's something else, something undefinable, something deeper than physiology. I can feel it, but can't grasp it. Why do some people heal and others don't? How do people heal? There it was, the question I really wanted to ask. How do people heal? And what does that mean to heal? I decided to find out. Using the classic grounded theory process, an inductive method of moving from specific details to general concepts, after finding patterns in the experiences of many, this theory formed. I present the main concepts to you now. Interwoven throughout are the stories of the study participants. Their names have been changed. Healing is a physical, psychological, and spiritual endeavor, and each layer influences the other. But it isn't a miracle. It's a process, one in which we are designed to engage if we so choose. There's a pathway to what I now call real healing, the process of making whole and coming home to our authentic selves. In 2001, Martin fell off his roof as he was attempting repairs. It wasn't that he was careless. His ladder was a bit unsteady, but he knew how to navigate an unsteady ladder. On this clear day, he lost his balance and fell. He had the proverbial accident. As his body hit the ground, shattering his right tibiofibular complex, Martin didn't first consider that he'd been seriously injured. He tried to get up and shake it off, but his leg wouldn't allow it. In that moment of impact, he didn't know he would spend months in bed and then many more months in rehab. He didn't know he'd find out he had osteopenia. He didn't know he'd reevaluate his entire life. He didn't know he'd choose to divorce his wife. He didn't know that in that flash of a moment, his life would change forever. But it did. His life changed not because his right tibia and fibula shattered, but because shattering his right tibia and fibula provided the opportunity, as he lay there in bed recovering, to take stock of his life and world. He had the time to wonder. His illness gave him no choice. He wondered, why this? Why me? Why now? As he wondered, the answers came to him, sometimes through a fog of medication, sometimes in moments of crystal clear clarity, singly and en masse. And as the answers came, Martin healed. He healed deep inside his bones and deeper still inside his soul. Healing is a process, one that engages various aspects of our humanity. It engages us socially, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and morally. It engages us in such a way as to force our focus away from those things in our life that feel settled and comfortable to those aspects of our life that are not fine, that are unsettled, unworkable, unstable, and unsustainable. It uses our discomfort and suffering to do so. In the 4th edition of Webster's New World College Dictionary, Agnes defines process as course of time, a continuing development involving many changes, a particular method of doing something, generally involving a number of steps or operations, a projection or outgrowth from another structure. Each nuance of this definition fits the healing process, even that which defines process as an outgrowth from another structure. Healing takes time. All processes do. Humans exist in a space-time continuum, so all human endeavors exist within this frame. Healing is no exception. Simple wounds, like a paper cut or a scratch, require days to heal. They do so because physical wound repair involves a sequence of steps designed to generate the new tissue to fill in the gap. Bigger wounds, wounds that exist in multiple domains of human experience, take even more time. They do so because repair follows a sequence of steps at multiple levels of the human organism's functioning. This multi-tiered process needs its temporal trajectory to properly cure the patient. Cure, in this sense, means both care of the soul and restoration process. Healing pulls us along a developmental trajectory in one or more domains of life, many times while kicking and screaming. Pathos paves way to ethos. We cannot remain the same when we are faced with the discomfort and suffering associated with even minor illness. Our character builds and strengthens with just the increased experience and context that forms after we have been ill or injured. Extreme growth results with a greater intensity of a life-threatening illness of chronic disease state. If we know that illness and disease has purpose, our ability to stay with our healing process constructively increases. As our steadfastness, while engaging with the meaning of our illness, solidifies, our pain and suffering decreases. Lawless reminds us pain could be described as an experience of physical or psychological suffering that brings the patient to the threshold of the possibility of transformation. Pain becomes destructive when it solidifies a concept of punishment or shame. Then the person in pain falls into the inescapable self-concept of being a victim and is unable to change. If patients can lean into their pain and experience it fully, they can educate themselves in the subtleties of the experience and how it affects their self-image. This is the beginning of success in pain management. However, the greater point is that truly experiencing and working with pain allows patients to undergo a transformation that may open them to new possibilities for contribution to the community and even the culture at large. Healing represents a method, as in cooking, or a soft technological process that involves multiple steps. The changes that accompany the various steps of the healing process look remarkably similar from Healy to Healy in a very comforting way. Healing, therefore, constitutes a process that can be named and understood. I designed this study to find out the healing process people use. This new theoretical understanding points to a technology or set of actions one can employ for healing. However, any modality that engages the healer from all perspectives of the healing process constitutes an effective technology for healing facilitation. Healing constitutes an outgrowth. For it to happen, we must first experience a breakdown of a previous life framework, either through the gradual or sudden breakdown of previous life structures and belief systems. Martin had been only marginally engaging with his marital issues before he broke his leg. He toyed with the idea of divorce. In the past, he even made a gesture to do so. Via his complacency, he was enabling his wife's alcoholism. As a result, their life together was unworkable, unstable, immature, and unsustainable as it was. In a way, Martin had to break his leg to be put into the position to make change. Healing proceeds from breakdown events such as Martin experienced and does so actively, as well as being the culmination of actions taken on the part of the healee. The healee is the central figure in the healing process, but does not stand entirely alone in the process. Healing proceeds both from the psycho-emotional set of the healee, or what I've termed the intentional stance, and the degree to which the social system in which the healee resides provides support for the healee to undergo the healing passage, which I have termed the compassionate embrace. The healee does not experience a cure from the outside, although externally applied curative actions can play a role. The healee heals from the inside out and acts as her own agent of cure. Unlike the Western scientific view that healees are passive recipients of the knowledge, skills, and actions of doctors or healers, doctors and healers play a relatively small role in the healing process. They are essentially peripheral to the process and usually only serve in the role as passive supporter, even if they have utilized their skills and knowledge in an active way. Healing can be likened to a passage. It constitutes a progression from one state of being into another. It involves turnabout, transition, and transformation. It is an integral part of a human developmental process that involves, utilizes, and mobilizes every aspect of our functioning. As Epstein describes it, healing has little to do with the removal of symptoms. Rather, it is an intimate and integrative process that encompasses every aspect of our being, the entire spectrum of our existence. Healing transcends the simplistic notion of jumping out of a hospital bed or getting up from a wheelchair and walking. It involves the harmonious alignment of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of our being and how we relate to the world. The result is a greater experience of wholeness, wellness, and soundness. And wholeness is the birthright of every being. Sometimes the degree to which the healee acts as his own agent takes on heroic proportions. Jason engaged with himself heroically. In the aftermath of 9/11, he found his world falling down around his ears. 9/11 served as the culmination of an extremely challenging year. Firstly, one of his best friends suddenly died hit by a car while riding his bicycle late one night. Later, that same year, Jason ended a long-term committed relationship, one he very much valued and of which he intensely suffered the loss. Then, just a few months later, the planes hit the World Trade Towers. Jason describes his experience. And I was feeling at that time kind of beat down from those three events in a row. And I feel like there was a long period of some time where, it took me a long period to kind of deal with those three main events. I kind of freaked out to the extent of going, and I was going to pack. I did. I was on my way to packing up my van and driving somewhere out in the country. I went to the co-op and bought a bunch of dry goods and batteries and got water. This is before there was the third plane, and we didn't know if there was going to be any more, and I was like, maybe they are coming here. So I was kind of scared and called my boss and told him I was not going to come in. But then my roommates talked me out of it. And after the third one got dropped somewhere in Pennsylvania, and then it was all-day television, just watching that whole unfolding of that business. So that was kind of messy for me, where I got in kind of a panic about it. I ended up going there to New York City, and I had to see it, and see it with my own eyes. I went there like 5 or 6 days later, to see if I could help to clean up things. And they ended up not needing me or wanting me or anything. But there are just those times, the aftershocks. There just seems like there's a numb feeling. By going, I was just trying to do something to start some kind of healing for myself and maybe help some other people. And I guess I just needed to see it, to assist, to make sure it was based in reality, because television isn't real. I mean, they're showing live photographs, but it's not the same as seeing it with your own eyes. It really did happen. Seeing it was one of the first steps forward. Like, here I am. It was a little bit symbolic of my whole thing, too. The third of these three dramatic events in 1 year. I felt, even through the TV, I felt the pain of the people who lost folks and the people who were actually there. I felt their pain too. The whole coming back afterwards when you're driving, there's something in driving where the sort of the hum of the tires on the highway slows things down and gives perspective on things. And there's a healing to that, in that you know it's there, but you're moving away from it. Jason's big action results in big healing. Healing involves physical repair when our physical selves need reparation, but it also engages our psycho-emotional selves as they relate to our spirituality. In fact, healing largely appears to be a spiritual process attended by physical breakdown and mediated by emotion. In this study, no matter the physical or psychological challenge faced by participant healies, each and every one was fully engaged at the spiritual level of his or her being. That isn't to say that each somehow engaged in activities that look spiritual on the outside, like going to church, although some did. Some prayed, all engaged in reflection. Some relied on their concept of God for strength and sustenance. All found faith by the end of their experiences, regardless of their relationships to God. Some communed with nature, all communed with caring and supportive people, which ultimately served as a type of catalyst for their healing. Healing takes on the form of an outgrowth from previous life structures. It ushers in many changes that form a developmental stream, and it involves a sequence of steps that we can relate to as a method. This study proposes a theory that explains the method or process of healing of making whole. As in all theories, processes become immortalized through conceptualization. This theory of how people heal lives in the same metaphysical world. Concepts come to life through story. I begin now with a conceptual overview and an explanation of how the concepts of making whole work in relationship to one another. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, into the light of the dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Within the healing process resides the organizing principle of making whole. In grounded theory parlance, making whole constitutes the core concept of the theory. This concept constitutes the teleological force of healing. It both permeates and drives the phases of the process, in turn is delineated by them. Attached to the core concept of making whole are four sub-concepts: wounding, engaging the wounding, turning point, and embracing a more whole self, which in turn embrace the four phases of healing. These four sub-concepts represent the topographical features on the countenance of the making whole core concept. The four phases these sub-concept features embrace represent the actions taken while the healing moves from one part of the making whole landscape to the next. As we move farther into the detailed dimensions of the theory, the qualities or properties of the core concept and its four sub-concepts emerge. These properties or qualities pay homage to the central theme of the healing journey, even as they organize and explain the process, providing contour to healing's visage. The four sub-concept features organize themselves around the core concept as do the spokes of a bicycle radiating to and from the hub. At the same time that they represent a cycle of growth and development in service of bringing the healing into greater wholeness. The healing traverses them in sequence in a surprisingly linear fashion. The three forces mediate this journey: the intentional stance, the compassionate embrace, and obstruction. The four sub-concepts of the healing process are additionally punctuated by several intense and highly meaningful events: the primary wound, the pivotal event, the choice point, and the completion point. I suspect that healing can experience several cycles of healing simultaneously in various domains of life. Although this study does not delineate the potential aspect of the process, it points to the cyclical nature of the healing process and suggests that such an overlap of cycles can occur. Certainly, the teleological underpinning of the healing process would nearly demand such a cyclical manifestation. No one becomes completely whole or evolved in every domain of life in one fell swoop. As Ken Wilber suggests, Through the basic levels or waves in the great nest of being flows some 24 relatively independent developmental lines or streams. For the most part, they can develop independently of each other at different rates, with a different dynamic and on a different time schedule. A person can be very advanced in some lines, medium in others, low in still others, all at the same time. Thus, overall development, the sum total of all these different lines show no linear or sequential development whatsoever. However, the bulk of the research has continued to find that each developmental line itself tends to unfold in a sequential, holarchical fashion. Higher stages in each line tend to build upon or incorporate the earlier stages. No stages can be skipped, and the stages emerge in an order that cannot be altered by environmental conditioning or social reinforcement. It may even be possible that various cycles of healing occurring in different domains of development simultaneously can be out of phase with one another, follow one another as if in a spiral fashion, or even dovetail or get into phase with one another to promote major shifts in the developmental or evolutionary trajectory of a certain individual. This study demonstrates that all people traverse the same territory in their healing processes, mediated by the same forces and to one degree of intensity or another. As they are made more whole via their healing journey, they pass through the 4 predictable phases of healing. Their process is marked by certain key experiences that punctuate and help to organize their journey, mainly as a means to drive them forward toward growth and evolution. Making whole results from the healing experiences of wounding, engaging the wounding, the turning point, and embracing a more whole self. It represents a holarchy of life experience that contains each subcategory. Each of these dimensions of experience constitutes holarchies in themselves that subsume multiple other experiences, attitudes, and actions. For example, wounding subsumes the primary wound. Retarded arrested development, breaking down the intentional stance and the compassionate embrace. These properties serve to define and delineate the wounding concept at an action level. Preceding any healing, there must be a wounding of some kind. Wounding constitutes a breach in both the structural, form or physical, and the functional, psycho-emotional aspects of human beingness. The wounds can begin in the psycho-emotional domain, then spread to the physical or vice versa. Paula's experience with bronchitis illustrates this relationship. She had struggled as a businesswoman, fulfilling what she alludes to as her life's dream. She held this dream as a response to feelings of being unacceptable when growing up. Somehow, running a successful business would make her an acceptable member of society. The business failed to live up to her financial expectations, and she decided to close it down. In her words, "I just couldn't make it go. We did a lot of good things, but we could never make it financially viable. By the end of 2000, I decided I will just have to close it, to end it. And what I was going to do was just turn it into a place where massage therapists could rent space from me. And I would do my massage, but I wouldn't have the retail business anymore. And I was just so tired all of the time, just so fatigued. And it just took everything in me to get rid of inventory and make the space, redo the space and everything. And this friend asked me to go on this bike ride across the country with her. And I just decided to do it very spontaneously. And I found out I could make money massaging women on it, so I said I would do it. And that was going to start in March 2001. So in January was when I started this process of turning it over. So by the time I was done, it was about 2 weeks before I left. I was so sick, so fatigued. I did end up going to the doctor, and he said I had bronchitis. And he gave me some antibiotics. The trip seemed so overwhelming, but I showed up at the hotel where we were going to meet, and I just made the decision that whatever happened, happened. So anyway, I got up the morning starting the trip and put on my helmet and got my bike and started on this journey. The first day we went through San Diego and got up to the mountains east of there. And it was like a rainy day, but it was so beautiful. There was just something about it. And mostly I biked by myself. I got to the first stop and my friend said, "You're the third person to get here." And I was amazed and happy. So from that point on, I don't ever remember being tired. The next day when I woke up, the bronchitis was gone. Paula's physical shift reflected her psycho-emotional shift. When she felt accomplished, her bronchitis released and her physical self rebalanced. The primary wound must be deep enough to rock the world of the wounded. They must be unable to actuate in one or more lines of development as a result of their wounding. Their woundedness arises out of a perceived or actual threat to their sense of safety in life and the world. To reiterate, this threat can either be actual, as in a life-threatening trauma that causes shock and its attendant spin-off physical and psychological reactions, or perceived, as in experiences that feel so overwhelming emotionally that they shut the experiencer down as if their safety or life had been threatened. Malick describes wounding this way. Essence is the pure unconditioned nature of who we are, the purest fiber of our being. It is more fundamental and intrinsic than our personality. A frustration of the expression of those essential qualities causes a wounding. To compensate, the child develops defensive patterns and learns other behaviors to protect itself and fulfill its needs. The child starts to live its life from the psychological structures that developed in response to life circumstances rather than its own essence. We lose contact with the experience and presence of our essence and its essential qualities, and we literally feel a hole or emptiness or deficiency in ourselves. Most often, this is frightening and painful. One of the characteristics of the ego personality is that it feels it must compensate for this loss. It feels it must and can substitute for it. However, the compensations that it uses only mimic the essential qualities, and rather than originating from essence, they are rooted in defensive avoidance of life's pain. Healing, then, is about stripping away those compensations and restoring our connection to our essential nature, and pain inevitably results. Despite the attendant problems associated with the primary wound, it serves a greater function at the spiritual level. As it negatively impacts the physical and psychological well-being of the wounded, it also performs a meaningful function in the service of evolution. We are basically evolution's bitch. The primary wound functions as a foil for the potential healer, tripping him up as a means to slow him down. It occurs as an opening volley to the degenerative process, yet in turn stimulates the greater healing process. It is catalytic at the same time that it is a negative psycho-emotional and physical response to the events of life. This is a form of instrumental savagery, wherein something bad happens for good reason. The primary wound should not be confused with the wounds created via degeneration. Further breakdown of psycho-emotional processes in a physical tissue can occur either as a result as the primary wound as in trauma, or the obstruction events due to resistance to the primary wound resulting from the limited context that may exist at the time of the wounding. The available context at the time makes a difference. A 3-year-old has much less capacity for making sense of life events than a functionally mature 30-year-old. Other obstructions that facilitate degeneration can be the absence or limited presence of a compassionate embrace or a productive, intentional stance. 2 concepts I will cover in more detail later. As well, from a transpersonal view, the primary wound may have occurred in a transpersonal context. Past life phenomena may contribute in some form or fashion that can be recapitulated in the subsequent life through one's psychological reaction to life events, or even through the presentation of physical challenges like congenital blindness, malformations, or syndromes. This view, not widely held because of its surrealism, gains more ground yearly in the West as research evidence mounts. Eastern philosophies have a simple name for it: karma. Simply put, we can experience some great loss, as in the sudden death of a loved one, and then proceed into degeneration. Annie's experience serves as illustration. In Annie's case, degeneration manifested as deep depression after the sudden death of her father when she was 3. Her depression lasted for many years and culminated in drug use and abuse. Her drug use in turn created substantial tissue breakdown in her liver, which compromised her physical health. Moreover, the substance abuse created psychic breakdown that took the form of shame, inability to cope, social disenfranchisement, non-functionality in the real world — she couldn't keep a job, pay her bills, etc., and feelings of worthlessness and disconnection. The fall of the primary wound domino led to a breaking down process that manifested in every aspect of Annie's life. Annie claims that her father's death left a void in her life. Moreover, his passing also took her mother away from her. She felt abandoned as her mother traversed her own grieving process. Because she was 3, others made the assumption that she wouldn't miss her father much, and so never engaged her in discussion about her feelings and experience of loss. She fell into a deep depression and coped by isolating herself both mentally and physically. The primary wound left by her father's death caused fragmentation of Annie's previous world. He was gone, then her mother left emotionally. She felt alone and unsafe when before she felt loved, nurtured, and safe in her family world. In one agonizing moment, her innocence was shattered. Born out of this trauma was a belief of unworthiness, followed by actions taken both by others and by Annie that served to further fragment her. Annie experienced retarded development in all 6 essential developmental domains as a result of her father's death: spiritual, moral, emotional, psychological, social, and physical. She described herself in her interview as feeling like a 5-year-old, even as an adult, feeling miserable pretty much all of the time and not liking to be alive. She had few friends and felt scared most moments of her life. She often thought she was insane. She spent time in jail for stealing to maintain her drug habit and had multiple physical problems. She did not feel grown up, capable of making adult decisions, or physically well until her mid to late 20s, long after she got sober. Most of her life since her father died, she felt lost, alone, and abandoned. These experiences contributed to the formation of an ineffective intentional stance, one that kept Annie cycling back into resistance. The intentional stance is the attitude we adopt and our placement of this attitude when engaging with any object of focus. When life is going well, we move fluidly from intentional stance to intentional stance. There's openness, a sense of meaning to life, tolerance, relative comfort, and an organized and constructive yearning for life to be the best it can be. We feel a sense of direction that seems relatively straightforward. Our expectation of life is relatively certain and informed. We have a frame for our experience that helps us maintain a level of coordination to our actions that keep us focused on our objects of desire. We feel a willingness to grow and live life, one that is laced with curiosity and propelled by our desires. We feel no sense of desperation, maybe a bit of disgruntlement, because things do not exactly match our desires, but we are still able to move forward. Our small discomforts and disgruntlements can be well tolerated when we are held in compassionate embrace. Under these circumstances, surrounding us are caring and supportive people who acknowledge and validate us. Through their skill and knowledge, they serve as models of fitting behaviors as they facilitate our increasing empowerment. They meet our true needs, release us from our external concerns, and relate to us with positive regard. We feel valued and inspired by them, and in our darkest moments can sense through them the presence of grace. Alternatively, the lack of a fully present, compassionate embrace lost to us during degeneration and obstruction sends us into a tailspin. Our intentional stance breaks down into one of obstruction, most notably into resistance. We lose our sense of directedness, and our willingness turns into willfulness, causing us to act out in destructive ways. At some point along the way, a pivotal event occurs to shake us up and refocus us. This event causes us to touch bottom, confronting and challenging us. Annie experienced such a pivotal event. She leaves a 9-year-old alone with a friend, the mother of the child, who was overdosed and died. This action strikes her to her core in the depth and breadth of his immorality and irresponsibility. Upon immediate reflection, she understands the pain and suffering the child will face both as a result of her mother's death and the horrid manner in which Annie handled the matter, and this reflection connects Annie to her child's self via her essential self. Soon after this event, Annie realized that she needed to stop taking drugs or die. This realization shifted her intentional stance from one of desperation and suffering to one of empowerment and determination. The grace of the compassionate embrace reached down to Annie's core, and she was able to find within herself the strength to change. This shift marks a turning point from complacency to proactivity, delivering Annie from the breaking down phase into the bringing about phase, enabling her to engage her primary woundedness. Engaging the wound involves sloughing off the old and discovering the new. It both represents molting, regeneration, and first-time creation of ways of being in the world. This aspect of the healing process represents the most involved and complex activity. It is action-oriented and involves intense focus and concentration because it demands optimal engagement and paves the way for change. Bringing about constitutes the theme. During this phase, the healer both brings the process about from degeneration to generation and brings himself around face to face with himself. The bringing about allows the healer to come halfway around or 180 degrees in the healing cycle as we envision the circular shape of the healing journey. The healer actively and layer by layer engages with the wounding alternatively by tapping in, taking on, reframing, and expanding. The process forms a web-like structure. Each action interweaves with the next within the more linear aspects of this healing phase. In the figure, one can see the tapping in and taking on actions intersect. At these intersections, the healer can experience a reframe. This in turn results in expansion and is followed by a change in thinking and behavior. To illustrate, Annie meets up with herself during a key experience. This begins the bringing about phase for her. During a drug-induced high, Annie experiences the presence of an inner voice that tells her to stop. That's the tapping in. In that crystalline moment, she knows that her drug-taking days are over. Taking on. This reframing moment enables her to see her drug-taking as unproductive behavior that will eventually kill her. It galvanizes her intentional stance, thereby refocusing her on a future without drugs. She sees a drug-free future clearly and as a viable alternative to her current way of living life. This ability to see herself and her future without drugs constitutes an expansion and leads to a change in behavior. It actually takes Annie 9 months before she is able to see her world through non-drugged eyes. Her experience in rehab brings her need for nurturing sharply into focus as she will jump through hoops to garner the attention of her counselor, even acting out as a way to get a whiff of the compassionate embrace. As yet, she is not resourced enough to journey through this phase on her own steam. It takes years in AA to begin to get a grasp on who she is being in the world versus who she wants to be. AA teaches her, providing new information that she takes in and takes on repeatedly. She receives loving and honest feedback. She sees fitting behaviors modeled by her helpers. She receives new information that helps her reframe her experiences. She learns new ways to resource herself that replace the drugs and assist her to feel connected to something greater than herself. As time marches on, Annie's sense of herself keeps expanding in response to her actions of tapping in, taking on, and reframing. She learns so much about life, about constructive ways of being in the world, and about herself that her understanding of who she is broadens and deepens. She feels empowered to make decisions that maintain her integrity with her most essential self. Not taking drugs becomes a covenant, a new frame for her relationship with drugs that empowers her and brings new meaning to her life. She takes different actions in her life, goes to college, makes new friends that are outside the drug culture, in short, reinvents herself. This occurs not by accident, but by design. Annie feels desperate for a different life. This desperation pushes her to commit to a different way and brings her out of willfulness into willingness. Her desperation turns to passion and curiosity, and she experiences hopefulness for the first time in a very long time. She is pulled along by her increasing comfort, knowledge, and awareness. Eventually, her hope morphs into faith and clarity of purpose emerges. She becomes highly focused on her future and begins to leave her past behind. Annie comes to hold a framed expectation that her life will, in fact, be different, more fulfilling, and that she will have more control over it. Her belief in her power changes her from a victim to a co-creator and paves the way for her shift into her most authentic self. This powerful and focused intentional stance generates in Annie steadfastness. She remains sober even as she makes more inappropriate choices for herself. Boyfriends who treat her badly, unfulfilling work choices, changes in her major in school multiple times. This level of tolerance for the discomforts of life demonstrates that Annie has a high degree of focus on a productive future even as she continues to make mistakes while learning who she wants to be. Like the Energizer Bunny, she just keeps going, going, and going. Annie's story poignantly illustrates her high level of investment and engagement in this phase of her healing. This part of the journey demands much, but also delivers much. In the words of Siegel, human beings grow and develop by A, expanding their schemas through the incorporation of new information, B, becoming increasingly hardy through a growing tolerance for the unpleasant, C, increasing their ability to inhibit responding so there is sufficient time to detect and evaluate relevant information, D, increasing the integration of previously disparate information realms, and E, a continuing process of self-differentiation and integration. Annie is helped along the way by people who love and care for her, most meaningfully her mother and her boyfriend. Additionally, her compassion and embrace helpers consisted of her counselors and her AA sponsors. She states that at every expansion step she would find a new sponsor. Each new sponsor modeled different behaviors for her. The first modeled how to take care of herself, how to feed herself, bathe herself, get a job, etc. The second embodied the philosophy of how to live a rich and fulfilling life. And the third is a spiritual mentor, a model of how to live from an authentic place. Her mother, originally one source of wounding for Annie, remained steadfast through Annie's trials and tribulation. Inside, Annie felt her mother's genuine caring for her despite a desire to pigeonhole her mother as one who harmed her. Gradually, a solid sense of her mother's love developed, replacing the old view that her mother abandoned her. It took a long time for Annie to see her mother as a human being with human needs. She held an expectation that her mother deliver love to her only in ways specified by Annie. Over time, Annie matured into an understanding that her mother loved her even if her mother delivered that love in her own unique and meaningful way. This form of compassionate embrace served Annie well. At the rock bottom of Annie's experience with drugs, her mom was the only person in her life from a non-drug-filled world. Her mother remained the only person who would help her out financially and hold hope for her recovery. Annie's mom was the only person who delivered tough love when necessary, a move that forced Annie to resoundingly hit rock bottom, forcing her to decide to enter rehab. This steadfast love, whether gentle or harsh, taught Annie that she was much more than the garbage she had come to believe herself to be. Annie's boyfriend, partner at the time, became a central figure in the final steps of maturation that ushered in Annie's turning point. Annie speaks of him as the first romantic friend who saw something worthy in her. She was able to see her own worthiness reflected by him. She began to value herself as he did. For the first time, she felt deeply witnessed, and it sunk in. She could now feel her value, not just think it. His unabating love and respect for her served as a catalyst, creating a foundation of resource that allowed her to step fully into a healing turning point. The turning point takes the least amount of time along the temporal trajectory of the making whole journey. The healing invests far more time and heavy preparation during the bringing about phase, which serves as a laboratory of exploration that uncovers the essential being of the individual. When this exploration reaches critical mass and enough of the psychological structures that interfere with essential expression have been dismantled, the healer enters the turning point. In fact, the turning point will not show itself until and unless the healer has solidified himself enough to face his deepest, most authentic self and is able and willing to let go of his woundedness. Much like the pivotal event in the bringing about phase, there is a pivotal feel to this aspect of the healing process. The turning point manifests as an intersection and a couplement in the making, depending on the readiness for the healer to accept, surrender, own, and achieve the choice point. For Annie, the choice point presented itself only after she became aware of an essential aspect of herself that represented a thread of her being. She says, "I felt like I realized there was some kind of constant thing about me that was truly me." Then she had a realization that her therapy was somehow keeping her wounded, and she says, "It was time to look at things in a different way. It was like a jumping off point, like going from a wounded child to wrapping that part of my life up and moving on." Lots of things replaced the woundedness, definitely self-love and self-respect. And also the people in my life at that time changed. My current partner in my life came around at that time. And it became really obvious that there were all these possibilities, what felt like positive possibilities. Before, it felt like I had no right to be alive. And before that feeling, it felt like being born, coming here, being innocent, and being who I am, and being rejected by the only person who loves me, being rejected for who I am, and ultimately that I had no right to be here. Then there was this moment, it went from like this is who I am, to this is one part of how I felt before. That was who I thought I was. I am wounded, and it wasn't like that anymore. Annie's acceptance, surrender to her sensed thread of authentic, essential being moved her into a place of owning her experience instead of resisting it. In that owning, she placed herself squarely into the coherent fulcrum of the choice point. Annie's choice point occurred rather quietly, as most do, lasting perhaps a moment. Within her choice point moment, she felt a sense of crossing over, of moving into a knowing and a letting go all at once. In that potent moment, she realized her father loved her dearly and that his passing had nothing to do with her. She suddenly felt his love somatically, and as she did, the void in her life filled and she became more whole. She immediately felt release from her suffering and her pain. This momentary pause in the action of life feels timeless. Annie had no idea how long it took her to traverse this domain. She had a sense of quietness and stillness, a feeling of suspension. She herself was very present, nearly hyper-focused on her experience. As she hovered in this state, there was a certain numinous quality to it. She knew that everything was good and proper and in its place. She felt her body keenly, but also felt connected to something other than her body. In this state, she felt inspired and grounded, all in one. Witnessing Annie's choice point were three friends and a facilitator. They too felt the numinosity. Although they did not know exactly what Annie experienced in that moment, they knew it was important and sacred. Lala speaks of such moments. Only one day when I was working with a woman, I experienced a deep caring feeling, a sense of being with her without the need to be her therapist, a professional, or even a friend. I felt the boundaries between us dissolve. I was aware of a deep conscious regard for her as a person and respect for her needs, yet the experience took me beyond any I had had with a patient before. I concluded that what I experienced could best be described as transpersonal moments of relationship. They do not arise from the pathology of unresolved conflicts of the unconscious. Rather, they are windows of cosmic realization that we as humans exist beyond our individual personalities. They are opportunities to discover the depth of our capacity to genuinely care for another individual. In this quantum jump, we come to realize a new energy, a new capacity within us. This moment of revelation expands to all who are within it. Some might relate to this healing moment as a peak experience, and indeed it shares certain qualities with what is termed such. However, in the choice point moment, one crosses over from an ordinary state of reality into an altered state of consciousness. One finds new meaning in life and redefines oneself in this space, this point of no return, for there is no way to go back to the old self, represents a transformation. I call it the choice point because one must actively choose to make the crossing. The coherence generated by acceptance, surrender, and owning in turn creates a place at which the healer hovers between one way and another way. The healer must commit to leave the past and move into his future. He does so from the now of the choice point, unencumbered by the angst of the past. This letting go releases him from the bondage of his psychological constructions that arose out of his woundedness. Not every participant related to their choice point from a spiritual perspective, as did Annie. Their experiences may have been so subtle as to be available for words only upon reflection. But when they spoke of it, their descriptions sounded so alike as to be uncanny. Many of them didn't even know they'd made a choice, but their lives were markedly different after a certain point in their healing process, and they felt more settled. I could tell from their descriptions of what came after that they had had a very potent transformational moment. Once traversed, the choice point fades and the healing moves into the final phase of healing, embracing a more whole self. I liken this aspect of making whole to coming back down from the summit. In this stage of the journey, the healing must reorganize around his choice. He reconnects, readjusts, reclaims, redefines, defragments, and establishes a new continuity. This integration results in rapid expansion in one or more domains of human beingness where growth was previously held back by the woundedness: spiritual, moral, emotional, psychological, social, and/or physical. As well, growth in domains not held back can occur, pushed along by the unhooking from old ways that marks the path of the making whole journey. Annie describes her experience. It was like a jumping off point, like going from the wounded child to wrapping up that part of my life and moving on. It became really obvious that there were all these possibilities, what felt like positive possibilities. Insanity for me is my resistance to what makes good sense. Sanity is like letting go, and peaceful and truthful and closer to what is right for me in the moment. It seems like if I don't want to, I don't really need to be struggling through life like I have been in the past. I don't need to be doing that anymore. I have a sense of some universal truths. I don't know what they are, but I sense them. I just feel this connectedness. Ease comes to the fore in embracing the whole self. It replaces struggle. It enables healers to take stock of their experiences without the wincing that comes along with reflection and other phases of the healing journey. Total acceptance of the journey resides here. As the healer takes stock, he recognizes that he has had a choice all along, a choice that he was unconscious of, blinded by his pain and suffering and its attendant resistance. The healer takes on his ability and right to choose his future in all its concrete manifestations. Through reflection, the healer recognizes the gains of his journey, not just from the physical standpoint, but at other levels of his being, as we see in Annie's testimony. She recognizes her resilience and feels empowered by it. Her new skills acquired during the bringing about phase enable her to see her path as connected and whole, rather than disjointed and meaningless. Her journey takes on new meaning. She is able to see and glory in this new perspective. As she does, perhaps unknowingly, she embraces her inner wisdom and she evolves. The integrating subphase culminates in a completion point. Once again, the healer is brought around, this time full circle, but with increased energy and vitality, a lightness of being takes hold. Suddenly, the healer knows his process is over and he feels a sense of freedom, peace, and relief. He feels delivered. Somatically, a grounding occurs accompanied by a deep breath in. What follows is a sense of feeling connected to the earth, a sensation that remains past this healing cycle. It may fade into the background of awareness over time, resurfacing spontaneously from time to time. This connectedness refreshes and centers the healee. A sense of solidity pervades his being, and he feels content in his liberation from his woundedness. The healer's future landscape opens up to him, and the trapped energy released from his resistance and inefficient psycho-emotional constructions serve as a push to go forward in life. He is organized at a higher order, which generates the ease, the inner wisdom, and the contentment. Out of this quieting, connecting, and opening comes a compassionate embrace that flows from the self outward. This outward flow comprises the paying it forward stage of the compassionate embrace. The healer has been so empowered to be his or her witness and helper that it seems natural and logical to move from the internal experience of the embrace to externalizing it and offering it to others. Many of the participants in this study engaged in pay it forward activities. Some volunteered their time to help others diagnosed with their same illness. Some simply demonstrated more compassion in their work and social venues. Annie speaks of this several times in her interview. For her, coming out of herself and giving to others kept her both anchored and enlightened. She felt moved to provide to others what had been provided to her along her healing path. This positive regard for others constitutes a form of self-witnessing. When we can admit to ourselves how hard the journey has been and appreciate our trials, tribulations, and victories, we feel highly motivated to kiss the brow of the damned as others have kissed ours. This figure shows the flow of the making whole process, and you have handouts that you can download from the website, that is called healing. We experience primary wounding either transpersonally, prenatally, in infancy, during childhood, or at some other point in life, which causes us to be stopped along our developmental trajectory. We cope by creating psychological constructions that show up as beliefs that then translate into actions, either defensive or otherwise. These constructions drain us of energy and eventually cause such degeneration and decoherence that we experience a breaking down. If we have skills, breaking down leads us directly to a bringing about. But more likely, we need to build skill, and we'll spend some time in the cycle of breaking down. Obstruction, build more constructions, break down more, etc. This unsustainable and resource-consuming cycle eventually erodes coherency so far that a major event must occur to bring us to our senses and reorganize us. We therefore must experience a pivotal event to bring us back to ourselves. This pivotal event forces us to pay attention and begin the real work of putting to rest our inauthentic selves, to allow that freer, more authentic self to overcome the primary wound. We must be willing and capable of taking in, taking on, and reframing in order to expand and move into a turning point. As we engage in the task of embracing the wounding, the strength and intensity of two essential resources will help us. The compassionate embrace and the intentional stance powerfully support us in a movement toward the turning point. If we are not resourced enough, we will lapse back into obstruction and undergo another cycle of breaking down. As the compassionate embrace solidifies and the intentional stance galvanizes, we empower ourselves to accept, surrender, and own our experience. As we do, we squarely look ourselves in the eye and see the truth of who we are. This shifts us into a choice point within which we let go of the way things were or seem to be and usher in a different future, one which we create. We recognize both our power and our right to choose ongoingly, and we see that all along we have had that power and that right. The realization both frees us from a fettered existence and makes us responsible for that fettering. As we embrace this ultimate form of power, we feel a sense of connection with that which is greater than ourselves. Our connectedness brings us to resolution and completion. This cycle of healing prepares us for the next round, of which there may be one or many more as we move along a developmental trajectory that propels us into wholeness. Healies never stop moving as they traverse the process. The 4 phases are about this movement through action taking. As in all good stories, the healing story has a beginning and an ending. The experience of healing is bookended by 2 important events, the pivotal event and the completion point. Many qualities mark the pivotal event. It feels harsh, confronting, generates crisis, grabs attention, and may create shock. The completion point feels warmer, more gentle, like a caress. It represents the opposite of the pivotal event. It feels like relief and freedom from the constraints both preceding the pivotal event and generated by the process in the aftermath of the pivotal event. The pivotal event is a pivot point from which the healer turns from the old and faces the new, the unknown aspects of self and self in the world. It is a bringing about of the healer's attention to squarely face what is wrong and needs to change. The healer does not go back to how it was. She must move forward, thrust into change and transformation by the violence and finality of the pivotal event. As examples, Martin falls from his roof and breaks his right tibia and fibula. Madeline's period stops completely, leaving her without reproductive choice. Jim's first wife divorces him, and then both his parents die, one after the other. Paula gets bronchitis after shutting down her dream business. These events serve to force the named healers to pay attention. They are brought up short. Gradually, the healer moves into resolution and the completion point after experiencing and walking the path of the healing journey, finally arriving at a destination. The completion point is a capping off, a putting into its proper place the experience while at the same time turning the healer away from the experience and moving them out into life as it now stands. It is a pivot in itself, but one unaccompanied by crisis, angst, turmoil, and strife. It is a settling into a fresh, clean future unfettered by the old ways of being. The process of making whole brings us around to ourselves. Our disease states and illnesses provide clues through metaphor that facilitate this process. The meaning we derive from our breaking down, bringing about, shift, and resolution constitutes a process of filling the void, returning us to a natural and authentic state of being. Alice, a therapist, finishes with her last client of the day. She jots a note or two down in the chart and closes it, ready to refile it. She feels a bit annoyed with the treatment. She and her client have been working on a particular problem for far too long and nothing seems to be helping. As she shifts the folder from her right hand to her left, the edge catches on the webbing of skin between her right thumb and forefinger. The skin gives to the paper and she feels the sharp sting of the cut. It is shallow, but she curses under her breath anyway. She feels annoyed and then realizes that the cut will probably heal quickly. It's not so bad. She realizes she wasn't paying close attention to what she was doing and then decide the cut isn't worth worrying over. As she prepares to refile the chart, a thought pops into her head about the client's situation, giving her pause and insight. She hesitates, reopens the chart and jots down a tickler, a reminder to investigate her hunch next session. This vignette could have happened to you or me, a commonplace experience. Yet its apparent triviality is actually loaded with meaning, not meaning we attribute to it, but meaning that exists within it as it occurs. Alice has a breaking down phase. She feels frustrated by the seeming lack of progress with a certain client. A pivotal event occurs when she gets a paper cut. She feels annoyed as she does about the therapy situation. The cut occurs in an area that governs grasping with the hand. Alice is both grasping for a solution and grasping for safety. After all, not getting results with the client constitutes a threat to her self-image as a successful therapist. At a deeper level, Alice may have long-standing issues with self-esteem. She examines the cut, notices that it's not so bad. This act of tapping in, taking on, and reframing allows her to expand into acceptance, surrender, and then ownership. She realizes she wasn't paying attention. Perhaps she wasn't paying close enough attention to her client either. She reaches a choice point and crosses a threshold. The cut isn't worth worrying about. She takes stock as she makes a move to refile the chart. An insight about the client's situation pops into her head and she realizes right then that it may make a big difference to her client. She jots it down so she can address it next session. She feels connected to her client in that moment as never before. She feels a completion as she makes this decision. Bringing her hunch to her client will pay the experience forward. As a result of this series of events, she reinstates her self-image and matures. She will certainly remember this experience in the future. She may even share the story with a colleague or her client and perhaps have a chuckle. The making whole story remains the same no matter how big or small the healing experience. It is a universal story, one that engages the healee at the deepest, broadest, and most authentic levels of the self. It serves evolution. The healee grows and matures, changes and transforms, all as a result of walking the path of love. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. There's nothing you can sing that can't be sung. Nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. Nothing you can make that can't be made. No one you can save that can't be saved. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can see that isn't shown. Nowhere you can be that isn't meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need.